Good morning, YouTubers. Well, a number of people have told me that they like the this format, doing a speed paint, and frankly, the current shot that I've been working on has been so amazingly time-consuming that there really is no other way to do it. What I'm going to talk about, I think the video is self-explanatory. I just went through the process of the shot where the ninjas are climbing up the wall, and in Krita decided to redo most of the shot. So the first step was sticks and balls. So there's really two things I want to talk about while this video plays. First of all, one thing I realize is that there is kind of an intermediate animation step that I think I had been missing. And that is to go from sticks and balls, which is how you figure out timing and movement and where things are. You know, as I like to say, go from the known to the unknown. So, you know, like right there, you know that the hand needs to get from here to there. And then once you just, you know, cut and drag it, then that suggests for you where to put, you know, the upper arm to connect everything together. And that seems to be a pretty good methodology in terms of coming up with timing that is satisfactory. Now, the mistake that I've made is that in many cases I'll go from sticks and balls straight to ink, or you might say ink and paint. And what I've found is that's introduced a certain amount of inconsistencies, because when it comes to improvising the final drawing quality, you know what? I'm not actually that good. And so I need this intermediate step of a true pencil test to tighten up everything. And I guess for me the mindset is that there really should be no unanswered questions. When you go to ink, for at least for me, and others may disagree or feel, you know, have a different workflow. For me, once I go to ink and paint, I want to have no unanswered questions. I want it to literally be a grunt job. So all the creativity and timing and everything that makes the drawings look right and the characters look right should all be figured out at the pencil test. So the kind of the lesson for me was that the pencil test and the sticks and balls are really two separate steps. I need the sticks and balls step to figure out where everything's supposed to be in very broad general terms. And then the second step is what I'm doing here, where I take the sticks and balls, make it pretty much transparent, and then do a proper pencil test over top of it. And that seems to have worked pretty well in this case. Now, what you see me doing the pencil test on here is Ninja 2, and this was kind of it was a bit of a time saver, because what I did was I took Ninja 1 and I thought, well, if I flip him over, you know, reverse him, and then offset the keyframes downstream a bit, because Ninja 2 appears a little bit, in other words, the guy on the left appears a little bit after Ninja 1. If I do that, and then go ahead and animate the final step where Ninja 2, right, what you see right there where he's sort of shaking and having a hard time hanging on. You know, I was thinking that if I just reuse the keyframes from Ninja 1 but make sure it ends differently, that it'll probably sell and you won't be able to tell that I actually used the exact same animation for both guys. And as far as I'm concerned, that did prove to be the case. So now here, you know, I'm at the inking step. At first I was using the, probably for quite a bit of this first section, I was using the smoothing, which is pretty good. The stabilizer is what I use. There's different types of smoothing in Krita, and I tend to favor the stabilizer. Once I got, I'm going to say about halfway through the process, I actually turned the stabilizer off, and what I found was that if I really draw quickly, I actually do a pretty good job of keeping the lines, you know, as straight as they need to be, and that sort of thing. Now, The challenge of this shot, and believe me, it was a big one, is that everything about it really pushed right to the bleeding edge for krita in terms of performance. Because, for example, if I wanted to change the position of something sort of after the fact when there's already keyframes in there, well, there's a couple steps you want to do if you don't want to have some weird image caching issues in krita. So what I would do is I would add a what's called a transform mask. Okay, and that's if you right mouse click on a layer, there's an add menu, and in the add menu you can add what's called a transform mask. Okay, and the reason you use the transform mask as opposed to just doing a transformation of the image itself is that if you transform only the image itself, then you only are transforming that image. You're not transforming every image in the layer, and obviously if you're trying to change the position of something, you want to change them all. So between that and other matters of, say, grouping and putting the ink and paint on separate levels, which is something I'm going to come back to, separate layers I should say. OpenToonz uses the term levels. Everybody else on the planet uses the term layers. Which there's kind of a reason for that, since in OpenToonz you're always dealing with an X sheet, which is a slightly different concept than a timeline glued to a bunch of layers. But in any case, the shot, what you find is there's an incredible tug of war between maintaining procedural integrity, meaning that you give yourself the ability to change things downstream, versus efficiency and performance, which is, you want to flatten your layers as often as possible. You want to, if you do ink and paint, say, on 2 separate layers, at the earliest possible opportunity, theoretically, you want to bake those 2 layers together, because you're going to, krita's not going to have to work as hard. And in this shot, we were approaching 9 gigabytes of memory being consumed. And what happens is that krita starts crashing frequently, which it's prone to do anyway. If you, for example, if you do what's called isolating a layer, which is kind of like a solo button, turns everything off except the layer you're working on. If you do that, for whatever reason, there are certain things you can do, like a fill operation, that are very likely to make krita crash, even if it's not a very heavyweight scene, even if it's a lean scene. So isolating layers is, for me, it's generally for previewing and just making sure I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing. Now, the interesting thing about this shot, that is somewhat tragic, actually, in hindsight, is that I got the whole thing done, and I realized that Ninja 2's hair outline, and actually, let me pause right there, because the outlines are kind of an important thing. This comes back to what I was talking about. I did all the ink in black. Okay, so the ink is black, but then I know after the fact that I'm going to want to add a filter mask to the layer and do a little color correction to make the outlines gray, sort of a charcoal color, so that they stand out against their black costumes, that sort of thing. Well, it turns out there was only one spot in the whole project where I failed to put the ink and paint on 2 separate layers. And that was when I did Ninja 2's hair. I used the behind mode, blending mode, and just colored it in orange inside the black outline of his Naruto hair. And then I just used the transform tool to move the hair to wherever it needed to be. And that's kind of what you see. So the problem, the problem is that for performance reasons, because I was getting so many crashes, I actually had to bake down the project twice. Okay, so, and I can't even relate to you how, but you can see what I'm doing here. I'm like, I'm duplicating a whole group of layers, baking them down, adding a filter mask to make them black, adding another filter mask to blur it, adding a transform mask so that I can sort of morph its position a little bit relative to the guy, and now I have a cast shadow. Well, that's great, but every single one of those steps incurs a performance penalty. And when the software is crashing every 5 minutes, that gets kind of old. So what you do is you take your groups of layers and you sort of bake them down, and you wind up with 3 or 4 versions of the file, each one being simpler and more performant than the last. Well, this particular shot, as you can see right there, was not in HD resolution. It was actually really, really, really tall, so that when it's all done, I could take the image sequence of the animation, bring it into Blender, map it to a plane, and then add the camera move. No problem. And you'll see the camera move and some other stuff in Blender here as we get closer to the end. Well, the problem is, once I realized that Ninja 2's hair had black outlines, and believe me, those black outlines, I just missed it. And they stood out like a sore thumb. I mean, they really, really stood out. Well, now I'm 3 generations of krita projects downstream. There's no way to get back to the hair unless I go back 2 steps. Well, 3 really, if you count Blender. So go back to the original krita file, which is literally blowing up every 30 seconds. I mean, it was insane. And not only that, on top of all of that, there's really no way to color correct the outlines of the hair without changing the color. The orange, it's really difficult, let's say. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult to change the black without having the orange being changed. And I've been wanting to be really strict about my color scheme. So it's like, okay, what do we do? Okay, so then I redo the hair with the Blender grease pencil, and you see the final step here. I also added the ponytail in Blender with the grease pencil. But I had to redo the hair with the grease pencil, and then that rendered wrong because when you make a grease pencil shape cyclic, in other words, you close it, all of a sudden you get a big dot where the 2 ends connect. So I had to repaint the hair, map it to a plane, and parent that to an empty, and then animate that, and that was the guy's hair. So I finally got it done. And so now here in the final step, I animated the guy's ponytail, and here, after a very arduous couple days, is the final result.